Salutations, Utopians. Big news today in the NFL. I'm so glad to be able to connect with everyone today with stuff to talk about. First and foremost, Carolina Panthers have solved their head coaching bubble with getting David Canales, former offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then secondly, you got the Atlanta Falcons announcing just now Raheem Morris, defensive coordinator of the LA Rams, with the new head coaching title. Both were not on the same scale. The Falcons were a little bit more of a desirable job with their cap history and plenty of draft capital, not to mention great skill position players. The Carolina Panthers have a little bit more construction to do, hence the out-of-the-box concept going with Canales, first year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but had a great run with Baker. I want to be very clear. I was a little bit critical of Canales on Twitter or X. However, it's just the way he's being presented, not necessarily with his resume. When you're in the position that the Carolina Panthers are in, first and foremost, nobody with something to lose and a nice reputation is going to really take a job like that. It would need to be someone extreme like a John Gruden, who just is desperate to get back in the league, or a guy who no one really heard of or thought of outside of. We've heard Slowick, we've heard Ben Johnson. This guy is kind of coming out of left field. Let me be very clear, though. What I had an issue with was the fact, the way he's being named. And you got to do it if you're Carolina. I get it, but I like to always bring some objectivity. So with respect to objectivity on the topic of that, Canales is responsible for the emergence of Geno Smith's resurrection in Seattle. As you all know, Geno had a very not so favorable beginning start in New York. It's a defensive program with Rex Ryan at that time. It was a lot of musical chairs. As you all know, they haven't really been able to get rid of Joe Broadway's legacy, or at least usurp it with someone better. Now they finally, this year, had enough and went and traded for Aaron Rodgers' services. As you all know, that was catastrophic. So it's not necessarily been the most favorable environment historically. And even with Salas being a defensive coordinator, the Jets are just sticking to what they do best. So he goes to Seattle, he takes a year off. He wrote the book on how you get your career back in order. Didn't blame nobody, went under the radar. It's truly one of my favorite career one-on-one management moves that I've ever seen from a pro athlete, as opposed to what RG3 did, going to Cleveland right away, trying to avenge his career's disappointment with the Redskins, or at that time they were called the Redskins, now they're the Commanders, and throwing disses in the media, then trying to go to Cleveland when they clearly were on a terrible rebuild. And so it was not the best environment for Geno, if you know what I mean. And then he gets to Seattle, had a year off. They surround him well with Metcalf, Fant from that big Russell Wilson trade. Not to mention, speaking of Russell Wilson, he was able to take a year off behind a quarterback who you knew was not going anywhere, or at least in terms of his starting stature, with Pete Carroll, an offensive guru genius, obviously one of the most decorated and the most considered diamond standard at the head coaching position. Tyler Lockett, Rashad Penny, Kenny Walker. That team was loaded. They've just been riddled by injuries. They always know how to draft. Witherspoon's a phenomenal 10-year starter at cornerback, defensive back, which are hard to find. Bryant Holmes was favoring him before they traded back and got Jah Gibbs, since Witherspoon was off the board to the Seahawks in this last year's draft. Now, speaking of Baker in Cleveland, that's the other person that Canales has been, JC, head coach of the Panthers, new head coach, has been given credit for the emergence of Baker. Now, I want to be very clear. Baker was exiled out of Cleveland due to issues that weren't his fault. He knows that Odell was given the short end of the stick with the New York Giants situation, knowing that Eli was in his twilight. It was an awkward situation where you got to let your coach make your quarterback make the decision when he's done, because he had such a rich history with that franchise. Definitely getting jersey retired, definitely a Hall of Famer. The lineage is right, so you can't just push him out the door. Unfortunately, wide receivers have a different interest, though. They got a small window to really be successful, and his best years were wasted with a quarterback who had trouble throwing past 25, 30 yards. With that being said, he gets traded to Cleveland, and even though that was on his bucket list at the time, Odell went to a situation where he felt he was left for dead, out of his own words recently in the media. Baker tried to force feed him, even though Baker really had a impact on that culture from where they were when they drafted him to what he made them, and some questioning his draft status and him living up to it. As far as I'm concerned, he got exiled out of Cleveland, bounced got dropped from Carolina mid-season. It was looking really bad. Went to Sean McVay, in that mind who they consider to be another Diamond Standard guru. Get the journey. You see what I mean? Gino goes to Pete Carroll. Baker went to Sean McVay and got himself back on track, including some great performances on Monday night, and had everyone looking like a genius, most notably, that spoke highly of him, most notably Skip Bayless. So now you got Baker going to Tampa Bay. He's surrounded with weapons. Godwin, Mike Evans, who's been 1,000 yards every year. He's been in the league. He's in the record books. Consummate professional. And then you have, a vertical-minded offense just in general. Canales got this promotion hoping that, okay, there's similarities, there's parallel. Baker was an undersized QB. So is Bryce Young. Let's see what we can do. It's an excellent hire. I just think like sometimes the media gets a little too carried away, and like I said, I just want to make sure that we're clear on things. But Carolina nailed this pick, and I want to be very clear about it. They need to equip Bryce Young with weapons. They traded to get Bryce Young, and in that package with Chicago, they gave up their WR1 and DJ Moore. Christian McCaffrey had vacated the franchise. As you can see, he's having a 2,000 all-purpose yard season. You just don't do those type of things when you're trying to walk in a first overall pick at quarterback. So Carolina, it's a rich free agency. You got Justin Jefferson on the bubble, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Mike Evans speaking of, is also on the bubble with the Buccaneers, even though I think they're going to hash things out. A.J. Brown got inactive for their first game, week 1 in the Super Bowl playoff run. There's names out there. Cortland Sutton. There's names on this market. T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd is going to be interesting. How they're going to make that work. There's names that they can go after. But the one thing is they cannot rely on Adam Thielen solely. He's a slot receiver at this stage in his career. I have the utmost respect for Thielen. Thielen, Howard from New Orleans Saints, they've had some fantastic runs in their day. But we have to be very real. The less usage, the better. You need to preserve this guy. And so even if it means going and get a DeAndre Hopkins, they just have to make sure that they are loaded. Not to mention this draft coming up has some great players. LSU, USC has 2 phenomenal options over there with Rice, Neighbors. There's a lot of good players out there. So good for the Panthers. They got it right. I'm happy for them. I know I sounded critical on X. If you're on X, follow me. It's global_sports. GL with the number 8, BAL_sports. All right, let's get to it. Raheem Morris, 9 seasons, twice, and 2 different occasions with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He also was an assistant head coach, very interesting enough, with Dan Quinn when he was in Atlanta. I want to be clear, Dan Quinn is considered a hot name and is actually, some view him better than McCarthy in Dallas as the defensive coordinator. He's a better coach than McCarthy and was even rumored to have taken McCarthy's job. And even though I don't have the energy to watch another season, underwhelming season from the Cowboys, even though right now it's not looking promising for them, I could see him taking that job from McCarthy after next year if he returns. With that being said, this guy has a wealth of experience. I'm kind of shocked they went defensive, knowing they have so many important pieces offensively. Jonnu Smith, who had a breakout year, Kyle Pitts, Cordell Patterson, Bijan Robinson had an amazing year, and he was held back. This coaching system this season was very inept. I'm not going to completely say I don't want to go past that, just saying there might have been some tanking involved because they were egregiously inept. They were horrible this year. So, they got it. Drake London, they got pieces there, you know what I mean? And it's just about putting it all together. All in all, I think that hiring is a little surprising, but I will say this has been a record offseason for minority hirings. Good for the NFL. We love to see a diverse palette. If the candidate is qualified, I prefer to have seen Ben Johnson or someone who could have really utilized that offense, knowing it's a vertical league. But I think what Atlanta said to themselves was, we got the pieces offensively. We'll get a better mind there to do that, but we want a defensive-oriented coach. They've been struggling to get defensive backs. There's a lot of future. There's a bright future for them now. And I think that Raheem Morris he's 47, but he looks 35. This is a great hire for both franchises, especially for Carolina. Well done. All right, Utopians, all the best. Get up on X if you need to stay tuned. I'm always loading it up with more opinions. Cheers.